Good afternoon. First, I'm not going to suck all the air out of the room, but I do want to give a brief preamble for the uninitiated about the impact of the arts over the past century in Charleston that have involved both of these cultural organizations. The first seminal event, I would say, took place during the Charleston Renaissance, which was from about 1915 to 1940, when a very down and out Charleston was trying to figure out ways in which to attract people to town for economic purposes. Hence the Charleston Renaissance, where all of the artists and preservationists got together, many of which were involved with the Gibbes Museum of Art and taught there, and together much of their art appeared on postcards as well as in large prints, and they attracted a new group of tourists to Charleston. The second happened in 1977 when Charleston was down and out again, and Mayor Riley at the time devised this plan to revive the city by way of the arts and brought a major international arts festival to town, Spoleto Festival USA. So both of these have greatly informed the Charleston as we know it today. Now we are at a different juncture in Charleston. We are post-pandemic. We are in a world and in a city informed by the tragedy at AME, by post-George Floyd. We are in a bigger Charleston, and one shining example of the way in which the arts has recently had an impact that has involved both of these cultural organizations is based on the story of Omar ibn Said. And both of these organizations have approached it artistically. So I'd like them to talk about Omar and the genesis and the evolution and the impact of Omar.
Great. Thank you so much, Maura, for the introduction, and it's lovely to be next to you, Jen. Spoleto was first approached to think about the life of Omar ibn Said, who was an enslaved West African who was sold into bondage here in Charleston, South Carolina, at Gadsden's Wharf, right where the International African American Museum is being built, in 1807. And he wrote the only extant autobiography in Arabic that we have of an enslaved person in North America. This approach came through someone named Zeba Rahman, who was involved with the Doris Duke Charitable Trust, and approached my predecessor, Nigel Redden, to find an appropriate way to honor Omar's life. And Nigel then approached Rhiannon Giddens, this spectacular multi-instrumentalist artist that just contains multitudes. I mean, she is a folklorist, an expert in Appalachian music, has one of the most enthralling storytelling voices that I think exist and walk this planet. And she, in turn, brought on board Michael Abels, who was a composer for several Jordan Peele films, Get Out, of course, the most recent one with the aliens. What is that called again? Someone tell me. Okay. Nope. Thank you. Nope, Get Out, and Us. Nope was very good, actually. And Michael and Rhiannon started to construct this world that would inhabit the stage around Omar's life. Now, this started in about 2018, 2019 with a planned premiere in 2020. Of course, the pandemic occurred. And like myself in Berlin and everyone that I know, everyone was like, oh, it'll just be delayed by 6 months, it'll be delayed by 8 months, it'll be delayed by a year, and then so on and so forth. And the piece went through multiple iterations. At first, we had expected this to be a fully composed opera that would take place on stage. Then it went into a digital rendition, and then it went into a socially distanced opera rendition. And by the time I came on board in the summer of 2021, the piece was kind of like a sort of languished in stasis during the pandemic. And we made the relatively risky decision to actually make a significant artistic change at the stage director level, bringing on Kineza Shaw and her team. And they sort of injected new life into the piece, and Kineza and Chris specifically worked so closely with Rhiannon and Michael to actually bring to life their work. Now, operas are complex creatures. They're not very straightforward. They are reliant on multiple artists that have to work collaboratively. An opera in a festival is a particularly challenging set of circumstances, because a festival in and of itself is like a series of catastrophes. So basically, I always have to appear on stage calm, cool, and collected, even though backstage everyone is running around with their hair on fire. And Omar, to actually get it over the finish line, finally produce it, and finally have this piece, this opera, premiered at Spoleto last year, took an enormous amount of effort to create this piece that visually was written and created through the language of the autobiography. So the visual language that kind of was through, that unified the piece, was Arabic. To me, this is complete strange serendipity. I'm the son of Egyptian immigrants. I read and write Arabic. To be in a position where I am bringing this piece to life and helping to steward it to life, and to see Arabic strewn across the opera stage was a moment of like personal significance and almost kind of confusion. And I found that it was a vehicle that actually told Omar's story in the most unexpected way. You know, most people think that operas are primarily about people dying over 2 or 3 hours, and that is true. But operas are also incredible forms of hybridity. And it was that hybridity that brought Omar's story to life through visual means, through a written means, through musical means, through orchestra, so on and so forth. And the piece won the Pulitzer Prize in Music. That is correct. But we collaborated with the Gibbes on creating a work of art by Fred Wilson that was inspired by Omar.
Yes. And actually, going back a little ways, the Gibbes and Spoleto, they've had a long history together. When the conversations began, the artist Fred Wilson, we had planned to have an opening exhibition in 2020, Afro Kismet, and unfortunately that did not take place. And as you know, exhibitions take a few years and sometimes they fall apart. So unfortunately, we did not have the exhibition. But Fred himself, we commissioned a piece of work, and he created that, and it's a wonderful piece. We actually showed it with the opera last year, and then we will actually be putting it, a public sculpture piece, in front of the Gibbes this fall. And it's a wonderful piece because Fred spent some time during that period when things were falling apart, exploring Charleston and seeing our beautiful gates and exploring the metalwork, and that is what he has created. And in it will be the replica of the manuscript of Said. And so it's just kind of a beautiful, serendipitous way of this visual art telling this important story.
Right, and I think it should be said that, you know, the point of origin into this country for this enslaved Muslim was Charleston. And just as the point of entry for both of these works of art is from Charleston, and it has since radiated out in the terms of the opera to a point that has had repercussions around the country and likely will beyond that. And the same with this sculpture, which will soon finally get its place in the sun outside of the Gibbes after, you know, a few paces in order to get there.
That's right. After its world premiere at Spoleto last year in Charleston, the opera has been to LA, Boston, Chapel Hill. It will continue to go on to Chicago, San Francisco, and Detroit. And in the summer of 2025, it'll be in Italy. So, you know, I think the art itself and even opera is a way to bring the world to a specific community. And it's also a way to bring a community out to the world. Even if opera is an art form that really depends on significant private ownership. I mean, it's not paid for itself in the last 400 years, but there are places all over the world that want to tell this story, and they find that Omar is the most effective way to do it. So it's a remarkable thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another thing I think that both of the works of art, the performance and the sculpture, have in common is how much they honor the words of Omar above everything else. And I think that really talks also about this next phase in Charleston, which is about redressing narratives and what are the origins of story. And I don't know what the process was like for those artists, or if you were involved in all about that decision about how to stay as true to Omar's narrative as possible.
Yes. Everything is an interpretation. I tend to have a very distinct allergy toward overly literalistic art because I think you then have a challenge with your audience. I mean, the whole spectacular thing about the performing arts and having something on stage and having something in a museum is that you can have two different people see that thing and have completely differing perspectives about it. And if we can do that through a work of art, we can engender greater discourse. We can engender greater communication, especially in a culture and a world where people are not communicating with each other, where communication tends to be heightened by echo chambers and people are, sort of staring at phones and things like that. You have a way to actually, through that work, through the art itself, break down some of the most internecine discourses. So I think that is, to me, bringing Omar to life through opera. It was an interpretation, and it's always going to be an interpretation,
sure.
and it can never be overly literalistic.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And also, given the success and the resonance of Omar, how do you think for your cultural institutions it's going to inform your programmatic vision moving forward, particularly when it comes to creative placemaking and its direct ties with Charleston and its past and its present and its future?
Well, I think specifically for us, we were talking earlier about keeping to your mission. Mm-hmm. And I think, even prior to the pandemic, the Gibbes, created a 10-year strategic plan. And with that, everything that we do is around the four themes of social justice, innovation, health and wellness, and conservation in the environment. And I think we've been talking about these themes today in many of these discussions. And I think that is what is informing our work and, these continued partnerships with Spoleto, with the International African American Museum, sharing and telling these stories and using artists and, in the community. I mean, we're going out there now. We're going to have, this is a public sculpture piece that we will now have. And I think that's important to have these conversations.
Absolutely. And, I think both of your organizations are so outward facing. When people come to Charleston, they're two of the driving cultural organizations to engage with. So there's a global aspect of that, particularly with an International Arts Festival, particularly with some of the programming that the Gibbes does. And then there's a very local one, which we sort of touched upon. But so how are you finding that balance right now to stay regional and to engage with the community while also facing outward?
Well, I mean, I think, Spoleto is a very, very unique institution. It's a multidisciplinary performing arts festival. When most of the world has arts festivals that focus on a specific discipline, visual arts, opera, ballet, folk music, Coachella, whatever you want to call that. But you have festivals that are this kind of lightning in a bottle, this enormous, exciting catalytic period. It's delimited. It only happens on 17 days. We do 125, 150 performances during that period, and then we create our own work. We create new work, we commission new work, we produce new work. So Spoleto is truly a unicorn institution in the United States and one of a handful around the world. I think that what we are interested in is the primary fundamental property of the performing arts, which is that it allows you to feel. We don't feel anything these days. Things are numb. We look, again, at screens. We're cut off from everything else. You have, I suppose, the specter of AI, which Jonathan Frankel, who's this Harvard computer scientist, called ChatGPT possibly humanity's most boring apocalypse. You have this sense that there's this kind of drudgery around you of just like so much productivity that we're not productive as a species. When you can break through that through seeing a group of people on stage that have spent tens of thousands of hours perfecting their craft through their corporeal, through their corpuscular selves on stage, actually physically doing something. And the whole theater feels that at the same time. It's not just feeling, it's feeling as a community. And I think that's the power of the performing arts, and that's specifically the power of a festival. I mean, I think of myself in two terms. I'm very much a liberal institutionalist, and I'm very much a champion of festivals. I believe that our institutions should engender the open democratic process, the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression that has been sort of the guiding founding principles of this country. And I believe that we can do that through the arts and cultures in ways that we can't do that through other discourses. So that's going to be the guiding programmatic principle for Spoleto for years to come.
I mean, I know on my beat, I have a weekly column in the Post and Courier, and I often talk about the nexus of the arts and community. And even having moved back here 10 years ago, I've seen how the town has grown, and that can always place a threat on community as it stretches and also with all of the competing stimuli, with screens, et cetera, et cetera. So I have noticed in both organizations that you've made recent initiatives in terms of engaging the community. I mean, at the festival this year, there was Tell Your Story. That you might want to talk a little bit about that and some of the initiatives, Jen, also at the Gibbes, that and why you're doing it and what you hope to gain from these particular initiatives.
Well, I will say the Gibbes is jumping on the festival bandwagon as well. We have established, this was our second year, but we launched Art Charleston last year, and it's a 5-day focus on the visual arts for the purpose not only of our community, but really bringing people to Charleston to see not only what we're doing here at the Gibbes and highlighting our artists in this community, but we did have some performing arts as well this past year. But it has been very successful, and I think it's something. We had a partnership with Beeple this year, which also focused on digital art and NFTs. So I think that we're really starting to push the boundaries of just being a traditional art museum. So that's some of the ways that we're focusing on our future.
Go festivals.
Go festivals.
Right.
I think there are, you can only do, we want to foster a culture of belonging through Spoleto. And you need multiple levers to do that. The first is you want people on stage that are representative of a demographic you wish to serve. So that is a truly diverse demographic. The second is you want to go into the community to engender that positive change. You want to actually have educational vehicles. You want to have community engagement work. You want to actually create art and sort of foster empathic dialogue through the art that you create, through the educational services that you provide in the community, in the schools, in community centers. And that would happen, in the Charleston greater region and in the Tri-County area. And then the third is you want to lower the barriers to access. And we're doing that primarily through a pay what you will campaign, which is, the ability to go to a Spoleto show. We've pre-selected them. There are about 25 for as little as $5. And if you want to pay more, you can. If you don't, that's great. But it's just a way to get people into the door and a way to really change and broaden that, not change, but broaden and deepen that audience. And I think that is something that Spoleto can do uniquely at a leverage point that other cultural organizations, especially like, typical opera companies and things like that, would struggle with. Because, our leverage point to bring someone into the door is Nickel Creek or Elisa Amador or, Kishibashi. If you're an opera company, your leverage point to bring someone into the door is, the Magic Flute. So that we do have that as a leverage point, and Pay What You Will has been very successful this year.
Mm-hmm. During the pandemic, I was in a Zoom event at the Gibbes, and it was a real epiphany moment in the discussion about how it is easier, whether I think it's performing arts or visual arts, it's easier to foster exchange if individuals are reacting to a piece of art than when they're having difficult decisions one to the other. Has that been your experience, or do either of you have anything to add to that notion?
Well, I think we talked earlier, Dr. Matthews said that museums can be places, or art can be a form where you can safely express your views over complex issues. I mean, during the pandemic and even after, we launched town hall series with artists and activists talking about community and what it means to be human and coming and using the art or their artistic form. We have a vibrant artist community, and I would say we're actually in another renaissance. And we have an artists residency program. So we always have artists within the Gibbes on the first floor, which is free and open to the public. And we're actually using our artists to, now go out to the community as well and into the schools. And they're willing to do that and take their craft, which is wonderful. So we have it kind of both ways.
All right, I cannot believe we are almost out of time. Because I feel like we've just gotten started. But one thing I did want to ask you about is a little bit more about public art, because that's something that comes up often in Charleston, and it is a challenge in Charleston because there are many paces one has to go to get a permanent work of art. And if you had any insights on that.
Yeah, my predecessor, Nigel Redden, one of the most incredible things he's ever done was he created this public exhibition called Places with a Past that worked in specific areas of the city. This was 1991, by the way. You have someone like Anthony Gromley creating a work of art in the old city jail. It was way ahead of its time and was really an incredible way to build a discourse around these specific places and what they mean now and versus what they meant in some sort of historic past, and how the past bleeds into the present. Those works, some of them still exist in Charleston. And
the tiny house.
Yeah, exactly. House of the future.
House of the future. Yes, exactly.
So, I mean, some of them are spectacular works, and some of them allow you to really, you walk through the city, you see something that's striking, you wonder what it is. You Google it, you read about it, you understand what this statement is, and it's still open to the power of self-interpretation, to the power of that this work can hold multitudes. One of the best examples of this as well is Spoleto, Umbria, which had created works of art throughout the city. I mean, you go to Spoleto, Italy. Our festival is named after a city in Italy. You go to Spoleto, Italy, and you see, Calders and Buckminster Fullers and Soldowitz littering the city, peppering throughout the city, creating a kind of beautiful spice. And that really gives you a different sense of just like walking through a space, and also that the public could share this space. So yeah, that's something we're exploring. We've got a big anniversary year coming up in a couple of years, and we want to throw back to the festival's original multidisciplinariness. It had a major visual component. It also had a film component. There are things where we can sort of start to bring that back with life and vigor.
Wonderful. And Jen, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I wish we had more of it. And we'll let you know how our process goes as we get our piece out. outside of the Gibbes.
Right,
So
outside
stay
of
tuned
the
for that.
Gibbes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I know that there's a lot in store for this city, which is changing every day, and I look forward to seeing what both Spoleto and the Gibbes is going to be contributing to the next chapter of Charleston. And thank you so much for sharing
Thank
all
you,
these
Maura.
insights.
Thanks, Jen.